Over the last 135 years, 819 players have taken to the field in an Ashes Test match. Over the past 2 weeks, visitors to the BBC Sport website have been voting in their thousands for their best 11 players from both England and Australia based on their Ashes performances. And over the next 90 minutes, we'll be revealing the results of the poll. Helping me to go through the team, our cricket correspondent and perhaps more importantly, named third place in Country Life's Gentleman of the Year, Jonathan Agnew.
Beaten by Colin Firth.
What?
I know. I beat Rod Stewart, though.
Well, I'm delighted to hear it.
I know, it's extraordinary. There you go. These funny things happen in the background.
And ABC commentator Jim Maxwell, who joins us from Sydney in the early hours of the morning there. Jim, what can you possibly say about sharing a commentary box this summer with the third place in Country Life's Gentleman of the Year competition?
Yes, his accomplishments are never ending.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning to you.
Apart from owning more dogs than any other commentator on the circuit.
Well, that's what qualifies him, obviously. Are you both looking forward to this? I mean, we're saying that this time in a week, people at home in the UK will be thinking, have I got time for a couple of hours sleep? Am I going to stay up all night? What do I do this time in a week? There is nothing more exciting, I don't think, than being on the eve of an Ashes series.
I agree. I mean, I didn't think I'd be going because of my wife's illness, and she's done so well. I've just come back this afternoon from the latest treatment sessions. We're a bit wrung out. But because she's doing so well, I can go, and I didn't think I was going to. So it's actually sort of got a double excitement for me. I'll fly on Saturday and just can't wait because there's particularly that first Test match at the Gabba is always so important. England notoriously never do very well there. A draw's a good result. The Australians always come at England really hard there. In fact, they go there hard at anybody that they play at the Gabatoir. It's a tough, real tough baptism. And listening to you and Simon Hughes chatting earlier, clearly already England's tour has got a few issues. It did before it even started with Ben Stokes. So they are, you feel they are up against it. But if they can really group and perform well at the Gabba, and particularly, I know it sounds negative, but not lose that first Test match. I've got high hope for them in Adelaide, day-night, where you hope that England's quicker bowlers, the seam bowlers, will perform well. And then it's series on, but they've just got to start well. They cannot afford, I don't think, a bad opening match at the Gabba.
And the anticipation, Jim, I think is all the greater, isn't it? Because of the history that goes into this series and the fact that so many people want to join in with choosing their all-time 11. It means more, this rivalry, I think, than any other in sport.
I couldn't agree more. Yes, it's been very healthy since the colonials took on the mother country in 1877, and it's just perpetuated since then to become the significant rivalry in Test cricket, although there was a time through the late 90s and just before 2005 when a few people were saying, well, what's the point of sustaining this Ashes stuff because it's so one-sided. But 2005 changed all that, and that's been a very, very healthy situation to have this series, which starts out as a sellout. I was speaking to someone last night, can't get a ticket for the first or second day at the Gabba. And that is huge, even going back to the days of my youth watching black and white television, and the Gabba was a much smaller place in those days. It was never really a sellout as such. So to have around 40,000 people packed in there gives you an idea of the popularity of the series. And it's much the same even through to Boxing Day in Melbourne. We'll probably get close to 100,000 people on the first day. So the numbers tell the story, and I think there's just a little bit of a mystery about this series, because even as we speak, we can't say for certain who's in the Australian team. There's a lot of conjecture about who's going to open, who's going to bat at number 6, who's going to keep wicket. So that's good for the series. We love those talking points, and in the next couple of days we'll move closer to that moment of the first ball of the series.
I couldn't be more excited about it, just listening to the two of you talk, and the fact that I'm going to be there with you at the Gabba, my first ever overseas Ashes tour, reporting for 5 Live, keeping listeners to 5 Live updated throughout the night and in breakfast as well. And you'll be hearing over the next 90 minutes lots of archive commentary, amazing archive commentary, including from Jim and from Aggers, who will be part of our Ashes coverage this winter on 5 Live Sports Extra. and Radio 4 Longwave. Right, let's start working our way down the batting order of the greatest Ashes 11 of all time, as voted for by you. The options for openers that people could pick from included Boycott, Edrich, Hayden, Hutton, Hobbs, Morris, Simpson, Slater, Sutcliffe and Taylor. Now, for each of the 11 players that we have chosen, we will play some archive. But in this one instance, we can't, because our first opening batsman played before radio commentary. Jack Hobbs scored 3,636 Ashes runs for England at an average of 54.26, winning the Ashes 5 times between 1908 and 1930. Here he is talking about his technique in 1935.
You all know how to stand at the wicket just before a ball is bowled. Very well, let us imagine the bowler is running up. His arm comes over and here comes the ball. Your whole mind and your 2 eyes are concentrated on that ball, and almost in a fraction of a second you estimate where it is going to pitch. Your bat has come up and is ready to come down again. If the ball is short, so that it's impossible for you to get to the pitch of it, play a defensive backstroke, or be content to stop it. Of course, if the ball is very short pitched, you can get into position to hit it with all your might, either to leg or to the off, according to the direction in which it comes. So now, my friends, it is quite possible for you to do all that I have done. Go and do it, and may good fortune attend your efforts.
Well, that was Jack Hobbs speaking in
First time I've heard that. It's lovely.
1935. Isn't that amazing to listen to that? And what an indication that 100 years on, more than 100 years on, people are still picking him for their all-time Ashes 11, Jonathan.
Well, no one scored more runs, have they? No one scored more hundreds. He's got better and better with age. Cricket's first knight. I mean, he was clearly an extraordinary man, born into poverty, and saw cricket as a way out, worked ever so hard to do it. He was a decent bowler too, actually. But, the way he just kept producing the runs through all those years was
199.
Absolutely. I'd love to know why he couldn't quite get that 200th. You fancy that another couple of games and he'd probably have done it. But cricket does that to you, doesn't it? As well, I'm sure we'll talk about others down the line. But he was called the master. He's known as the master. We've had little masters since then, quite a few little masters. But this was the man. And it's funny looking at this team that you'll reveal as we go. Inevitably, it does have quite a modern feel to it, because that's really all that we alive now can choose from. But there he is, the senior statesman in the side, and quite rightly so.
I suppose the stats don't lie, Jim, do they? I mean, none of us were alive. I don't know whether you had parents who talked about him and players of that era, or grandparents, but the stats don't lie when it comes to someone like Jack Hobbs.
Yes, I think my father, I recall talking about him, but he was born in the early part of the 20th century, and there it is that Hobbs, at the age of 46, scored his last Test century. Just think of that. So it was an extraordinary, endearing and consistent career, either side of the war. And his mate at the other end must have been a pretty good player too, Herbert Sutcliffe. So that was an extraordinary partnership in itself, probably one of the most successful in Ashes history. So Jack Hobbs must have been a phenomenal player. I remember hearing that John Arlott used to have a lunch for Jack Hobbs every year. Wasn't that the case, Agnes?
Yes, it was a memorial lunch. They always turn up. Yeah, all the masters. They were admirers or something. They called them, didn't they? Yeah.
Well, funny you should mention John Arlott, because we don't have any commentary archive of Sir Jack Hobbs playing. But here is a poem that former TMS commentator John Arlott wrote about him.
No yeoman ever walked his household land more sure of step or more secure of lease than you, accustomed and unhurried, trod your small yet mighty manner of the crease. There was a wisdom so informed your bat to understanding of the bowler's trade, that each resource of strength or skill he used seemed but the context of the stroke you played. The master. Records prove the title good. yet figures fail you. But I cannot say how many men whose names you never knew are proud to tell their sons they saw you play. They share the sunlight of your summer day of 30 years, and they with you recall how, through those well-wrought centuries, your hand reshaped the history of bat and ball.
The peerless John Arlott on Jack Hobbs. I mean, Jonathan,
The Masters
that's
Club. I must get that right, by the way.
Tingles down the spine listening to that.
It does, yeah. But it was the Masters Club that John formed of admirers of Hobbs, and they would meet once a year and have a good lunch, I'd imagine.
Wow, extraordinary. So Jack Hobbs goes in at number 1 in our all-time great Ashes 11. But who will open with him?
England-Australia is the iconic series in cricket.
Colling comes in, bowls outside the off stump. There it is, 4 runs. Wide it covers left hand. Boycott 102. By no means the last Test 100 we'll see from this man.
Thompson's up to the wicket, he bowls to Boycott. Boycott cuts, there it is. That's his 100. And he raises his hands, the bat above his head. Well, what a triumph for Geoffrey Boycott.
Boycott, 96 not out. It's a half volley, drives it down the ground, and there it is. He's done it. He lifts both hands in the air. Jeff Boycott has got his 100th 100, and the crowd cannot resist coming on to the pitch any longer.
So that is Boycott's 100 with a 4, which Whitley did his best to save, and again, a Boycott sweep. So at least he's got to 100, I think, in the most original way of all his Test 100s.
So 2,945 runs at an average of 47.50 and 4 series wins out of 10. Good evening to you, Geoffrey.
Hello, good evening.
Lovely to have you with us. How do you feel about opening with Sir Jack Hobbs?
Thrilled. He was the master. 197 hundreds. I've heard everybody talk about him, how he played. Not only on good pitches, but apparently he was the master on what I used to tell Aggers about, uncovered pitches. He used to make runs when others struggled, so...
You didn't run him out.
No, I'm thrilled you're here when I get voted in, Aggers. I couldn't wish anybody else to interview me but you.
Listen, the public have spoken, Jonathan. You know, whatever you think about it.
You see, Geoffrey's going to hate me because Geoffrey, and I mean this in the nicest way, if you look at the others' options, Herbert Sutcliffe, John Edrich, actually, you have to say, in terms of pure Ashes, and you're talking runs, appearances and 100 scored, have got actually better figures. So I don't know what Geoffrey thinks about that. They're obviously, John he knew very well. In fact, I think John's the man you ran out more than anyone else in Test cricket, Geoffrey, aren't you?
Oh.
But Herbert Sutcliffe, I mean, you'd have loved it with him. But you know, it's one of those where it is very subjective. And for Geoffrey to score his 100th 100 clearly against Australia, that was a formidable feat. But just a very small sidetrack. It's interesting that both openers are English, regardless of who we picked there. You have to go through if you go through the top 20 Ashes run scorers, there's only 2 Australian openers, Mark Taylor, Bill Lawry. And I don't know why it is that Aussie openers, as is the case in this series, haven't actually necessarily performed very well in Ashes cricket. And it's just interesting going through that list. Very strongly dominated by Brits.
Have you got a theory about that, Geoffrey?
No, I just think about all great players, have got good figures. But it's not figures alone. It's about helping to win Test matches, and if you can't help win Test matches, then help to draw them so you don't lose. If you lose a Test match in a 5-match series, you could lose the actual series. So drawing is important, winning is more important. And if it was just figures alone, then you'd just get a schoolboy or schoolgirl to look at all the figures, and there you are. I'm thrilled to bits that people have voted for me. And I think it's perception by the public, and it's up to them. It's perception of, are you the guy that when the going gets tough and the team is in a difficult situation can get them out of it? Are you mentally strong enough to do the business and help win the match? So figures are important, but they're not the only thing.
It's character as well, isn't it, Geoffrey? And I mean, watching you as a kid, as I did, there was something, you against the Australians, your collar turned up and your cap on. That was important. There was one particular Ashes moment, though, that was missing from that commentary montage that we just played, wasn't there? One of the real highlights of 1977.
Thompson comes in, bowls to Boycott. Boycott pushes that. There must be a run out here. Oh, how tragic. How tragic, how tragic, how tragic. We welcome World Service with the news that Randall has just this minute been sacrificially run out. Let's leave the applause for Randall from a Trentbridge crowd as he comes in very crestfallen and very unlucky. Almost with tears in his eyes, he looks very disconsolate.
Well, the run-out's been on all the time because they have not run very well together since they came together.
I've got to say here, Geoffrey, that I was a 15-year-old watching her first Ashes series and getting into it for the first time, and I was a big Derek Randall fan.
I love him to bits, too.
I'm not sure I've forgiven you for that.
Well, I used to go out with him for dinner on tour. I love him to bits. But look, you make mistakes in life, and so when you're doing cricket matches, I've always believed it's what you do about it afterwards. The easiest thing to do then is when you've made a mistake, is to get out yourself to a silly, stupid shot, but that doesn't help the team. So it demands a great deal of mental strength and determination to stay in after something like that. That is very upsetting. I mean, it's more upsetting for Randall. He's out, but it's upsetting for me. That was my comeback test match. I hadn't played for 3 years.
Geoffrey's keeping us in suspense. Actually, Geoffrey scored 100 after that. And I think, Geoffrey, you would say that was your finest ever innings, wouldn't you?
Well, yes, because we were 80 for 5, and looking as if we were going to lose the match. I've run Derek out, and then we're 80 for 5. We're going to lose the game. And you've then got to really dig deep. And Alan Knott and I made hundreds, and we went on to take a lead and win the match by 10 wickets. And I hope that's what the public have seen, and not just figures, that it's about, are you strong enough? Because you need to be that against the Australians. This Ashes series coming up, it's not just about the talent that our players have. Have they got the mental strength? Have they got the courage? Have they got the determination? They can talk all they want about taking the Aussies on, but deep down, when it gets fiercely tough, and the crowd are baying for him, full houses, the Australians will give them hell. And when we're in trouble, which one of them is going to get us out of trouble and help win the match? And that's what it's all about.
Yeah. I've got to ask Jim, would most Aussie cricket fans have loved to have had Geoffrey opening for Australia?
Yes. You mentioned the Australian openers. I mean, I think Australian fans would have had Arthur Morris opening. They regarded him as the best player, averaging 50 in Test cricket. And even Justin Langer's record's pretty good, in Ashes cricket. He's averaging 50. So there are a few others out there. But yes, I remember Geoffrey a number of times in Australia, particularly 70-71, when he was in thrall and John Snow had such a strong series. And then, of course, he came out and played for my old club, Waverley, for a season here. And so he's well remembered in Australia for many tours and many centuries, because he was a phenomenal player. I always, of course, do say to Geoffrey, we missed you in 1974, 75, but that's another story, isn't it?
Would you have picked yourself, Geoffrey?
If I had to bat for my life, I'd pick me.
I think probably a lot of people would as well. Listen, it's great to talk to you, as always, Geoffrey. Thank you very much indeed for being part of our all-time Ashes.
See you next week, Geoffrey.
11.
Love you lots.
Look forward to seeing you, Geoffrey.
You've been cooking and learning to cook.
Off you go. We'll talk about it next week. We'll talk about it next week. Off you go.
So let's go back to our all-time Ashes 11. We've got Boycott and Hobbs opening, and there is little doubt over who is going to bat at number 3.
But in a moment there'll be a burst of applause because it'll be Bradman. Here it is. And here he is taking his first ball from Benson. Benson bowls to him, and he's off the mark straight away, and it's a 4, I think, to square leg.
There's another one, that's short, and Bradman's hooked it for 4. And that is fielded by a gentleman in a grey suit, whose return to the wicket is not at all accurate. Edrich bowls to Bradman, he hooks him for another 4. 4 to square leg. 2 hooks for 4 off consecutive bowls, and they're Bradman hooks. They're not lifted. He rolls the wrist as he plays the stroke, and the ball goes out there like a flash all along the ground.
I have endeavoured all my life to serve this game faithfully and well. I'm very proud to think that I came into it from a small country village, from humble parents, endowed with no gifts whatever beyond those with which nature presented me. In so doing, and in going on to my present position, I do hope that it may have been an inspiration not only to the youngsters in Australia, but also to the youngsters in England, just to show them that there is only one thing which they need in cricket, and that is ability for them to get to the top.
Well, Sir Donald Bradman certainly had plenty of that, didn't he? 5,028 runs at an average of 89.78, 5 out of 8 series wins between 1928 and 1948. And Jim, he was picked in 85% of all teams, which does make you wonder about what the other 15% were thinking of. But I mean,
That's right.
he was undoubtedly the greatest of all time, I would have said.
Well, just on the numbers, 1900s in 37 Ashes matches. So basically every second time he went out, he made 100 and he scored 2 triple hundreds, 254 at Lords in 1930. He always rated his best innings. And yet it's the strangeness of the game, isn't it, that he's as much remembered by a lot of people for getting a duck in his last Test match
Well,
as any other 100.
We'll come to that. Yeah, we'll come to that in a second, actually. So,
Yes.
so because I mean that's the sort of sad ending to the story. But I mean to listen. Actually, none of us really will remember seeing Don Bradman bat, apart from unless we've seen it on film. But actually, John Arlott's commentary of that shot, you could see him. You could see that shot being played, couldn't you?
Well, he played the pull shot. I remember watching a programme last time we were in Australia, and it was a terrific couple of hours, full of a documentary on Don Bradman. I hadn't seen this footage before. And he must have been infuriating to bowl out because he wasn't a tall man, of course, and he did play that short ball, or was short to him, incredibly well. I mean, there were pull shots as much as hook shots. They were only sort of waist high. But he would pull them before through the leg side. So as a bowler, of course, you just pitch up that little bit because you know he's on the back foot. He's waiting to play that shot. And he had the most fantastic cover drive as well. You'd have seen the shot with a beautiful follow-through. So that was a real strength. Anything short at him, bang, he pulled it. And, of course, the poor old bowler, trying to compensate, would then found himself driven through the covers. He was a statesman. I remember I met him once, very fleeting, in sort of a team lineup when I was 18. And I was struck by A, how small he was, but also B, sort of how unsportsmanlike he looked. He just looked like a small fellow, with glasses. And there is one of the greatest sportsmen there's ever been in any sport.
But this is also a man, you mentioned, Jonathan, that he wasn't very tall, but he was very good with the short ball. But Douglas Jardine came up, Jim, with a whole tactic with Harold Larwood to counter Bradman. That's what Bodyline was all about.
Yes, I think there are only 2 people in history that tried to change the rules to get on top of them, and that was Walter Lindrum, an Australian snooker player. They banned nursery cannons to stop him scoring so prodigiously, and Sir Donald Bradman by Jardine's tactic of Bodyline. So that shows, even in that series, I think he averaged 56, a series that England won. But he's a phenomenon, a scoring phenomenon, the like of which I don't think we'll ever see again. And he's still very much the number one Australian in terms of annual events. We talked about Jack Hobbs, the master, and having memorial lunch. Well, there's a couple every year in August for Bradman. It still goes. And the Don left us in 2001. So he's very much part of the furniture, although most people in Australia never saw him bat.
Well, a lot is made of his final innings, which Jim mentioned. He was out for a duck at the Oval. He needed just a 4 to finish with a batting average of over 100. And here's what he said about that.
Well, of course, there was a feeling of disappointment that I had failed. I had not scored. But I can truthfully tell you that I had no more idea than the man in the moon that 4 runs would have given me a batting average of 100 in Test cricket. If I had known that, I think I just might have struggled somehow to get 4 runs. I think perhaps it was a somewhat emotional occasion, and perhaps I didn't take as much care as I may have done. And Eric bowled me a particularly good ball, which just happened to be right on the spot and deceived me. Yes, of course I was disappointed, but it was one of those things. You have to accept the good and the bad in life, and that was part of my fate. So I think that in general it's been exaggerated. People said, I went out with tears in my eyes and I couldn't see the ball. Well, of course, that's rubbish. I'd much rather give credit to Eric Hollies for a good ball.
And to be fair, I think you got an inside edge, didn't you?
Oh, yes, I touched it, but I shouldn't have left a gap between the bat and the pad.
Well, that was the great Sir Don Bradman. His average, one of the most famous statistics in sport, 99.94. I mean, Jim, what did he mean to Australia? Not just in a sporting sense, but as an icon for the whole country.
Don Bradman, that Art Lennon song that goes on about the Don. Well, they wrote songs about him. That's how well known he was, and they named a museum after him, of course, down in Bowral. So his name lives on very, very powerfully. You see it everywhere when you go to various cricket grounds. His name adorns some stands, and he's everywhere. Our Don. The reference to him is continual and nostalgic, particularly when we lose an Ashes series. You think, oh, it wouldn't have been like that if Bradman was playing. He would have smacked them all over the ground. So we look at him as in an iconic way, and I think that will go for some time.
So our batting order so far reads Hobbs, Boycott, Bradman, and in at number 4.
Border 96 not out, and this is hooked away by Border before runs, and that's his 100. The ball was short, and Border, a good puller of the ball, hooked it over mid-wicket. Applause all around the ground, and from every England player. On the balcony are the Australian players. They're all coming out in the fashionable way, hands above the heads. They're clapping away there with a fractured bone in his hand. Border has stuck it out and also managed to play some excellent shots.
Now Border's in strike, and he tries to sweep and succeeds. And there's his 100 that's going down towards the boundary. It'll be cut off by Robinson. They've taken one already, and there's 2, and that's his century. Waves to the crowd, looks up the dressing room. All the Australian players out there on the veranda applauding him, and well they might. He's played a fine innings for Australia.
Here comes Bertham, certainly running in with more purpose now. He bowls to Border, well pitched up it is, and he drives it to mid-on, and that is Alan Border's 100, very well deserved, warmly applauded, not just by the Oval crowd, but all the England fielders.
Former Australia captain Alan Border scored 3,548 Ashes runs at 56.31. He won the Ashes 5 times between 1978 and 1993. Jonathan, what made him so good?
Yes, not necessarily an attractive player, a fighter, Alan Border. I knew him pretty well. I've got huge admiration for Alan. I mean, he was one of those who went through rather a strange time in his career, because he was always, and still is and remains, he'll be working, I hope, with us on ABC, a really affable man. A real delight to play with and against when he was playing at Essex, for instance, or did I play a test match against him for Australia. Never any unpleasantness, just a really, really nice man, And then, of course, after Australia came here and lost in 1985, well, he went away. Great mates with him, Botham and David Gower and these, and came back in 1989 determined that there was going to be no rapport at all between the teams. And he sort of laid these rules down on the Australians that they were going to be nasty. And it was a bit of a change, really, and he became known as Captain Grumpy, and he behaved like that, although really secretly, privately, he was nothing like that. But I mean, just a massively respected figure. He had to do a lot of it by himself in the 80s when Australia weren't that great a side, actually, and he was the one really had to do the run scoring until the wars came along. So a really interesting individual, and someone who I always really look forward to meeting up with again. That's really interesting, Jim, isn't it? Did he put a bit of the snarl into the Aussie team?
Well, he did in 1989. It was against his nature, although he was very competitive and always struck you as one of the toughest players. He was the fellow who said, if you've broken your thumb or something like that while you're batting, you don't show it. You just do not give the opposition an inch. Don't let them know, and don't wince with pain when you get hit in the ribs. Just keep going, as he did for a long, long time in Australian cricket. Much of the turnaround came through Bob Simpson being appointed coach in the mid-80s. He brought a rigour to the Australian team that they hadn't had before. And in fact, Border deferred to him quite a lot in those years when it came to addressing issues with the press. he was always uncomfortable in doing that, but he matured, and it certainly helped him quite a bit in the latter part of his career when a bloke called Warne came along and was the match-winning bowler in that series that was his last in 1993 in the Ashes. But Alan Border is underrated by many Australians because he was a fairly dour player at times, and yet he ended up with an amazingly consistent record in Test cricket, and he was an enduring run-scoring batsman for Australia, the like of which we haven't had many other than, well, we'll come to him in a moment, but the Border was special.
Yeah, OK, well, you almost said it, Jim. So let's hear who our number 5 is.
War is 99, one of the most attractive hundreds I've seen for a long time. Yeah. Will this be it? Newport runs in and bowls to him. And he cuts this one, and that's it. He's got it. He's gone down to the sweeper position, that deep cover.
Steve Waugh is on 97. Croft bowls to him, and he goes back and cuts, and that's 100. Waugh shakes his fist in the air in triumph, and it really has been a magnificent innings, this. He's scored 101 out of a total of 223 for 7.
And how Steve Waugh loves playing against England.
And Old Trafford now rises for Steve Waugh, who's become the first batsman for 50 years to score a century in each innings of an Ashes Test match. He's done it almost one-handed throughout.
Gough bowls to Waugh. Waugh goes back, pushes to the onside, wants the quick single and gets it! A great century again from Steve Waugh. He's been such a tormentor of English bowling.
Dawson comes up and bowls to Waugh, who drives through the offside for his 100. That is extraordinary. And Steve Waugh, a man of little emotion, can barely restrain himself now. His helmet's off. Oh, he's waving his bat. Alex Stewart shakes his hand. You could not have scripted anything more remarkable than what we have seen here this afternoon.
So Steve Waugh, 3,200 runs at an average of just over 58, 8 out of 10 series wins between 1986 and 2003. And if you're a certain age and you're English and you're a cricket fan, Jonathan, you will be sitting there thinking, oh, Steve Waugh.
The way he looked at you, you know, he sort of he sort of analysed you and sort of took you apart. I mean, I'm a huge admirer of Steve Waugh, and that commentary there at Sydney off the last ball of the day remains one of my favourite moments. And you know, that's an odd thing to say for an English reporter about an Australian captain who got under our skin so much. But I had so much admiration for that man. You know, the whole context of that innings in particular, with basically him being written off. And him still trying to show that there was life in the old dog yet, and that he played a beautiful innings. It was one of his finest innings. That alone, the fact that he got there off the last ball of the day, but he was sort of the real modern, or I'm talking about I suppose, the sort of archetypal Australian batsman, chewing his gum, so he's staring you straight in the face. Comments here and there. You know, he liked it. Mental disintegration, he called his comments that he would make, trying to get inside the opponent's minds. And he wound us up, but God, he was a fine cricketer.
Goodness me, Jim. When he was playing for you, you must have thought, right, that's it, sit back, put your feet up on the table, let's just watch this man, because no one's getting past him.
Yes, his record got better and better as he went on, and just to hear that crowd again, it brings goosebumps to you when they supported him at the end of the day. Everyone was willing him to hit the boundary, and Adam Gilchrist almost mucked it up in the partnership there and trying to get him on strike.
That's right.
Yes, so it was one of the great moments in recent sporting history to be there to see that, because there was so much emotion and theatre about it all. But he was a cussed fella, Steve Waugh. I mean, that 100 at the Oval in 2001 that Aggers would remember, when he was on one leg, he was told basically by the physio, go home, you're not fit enough to play. And he said, oh, what are you talking about? Of course I'm going to play. And then he got 100 on one leg. Yeah. So that's how tough and determined he was. And you hope that kind of attitude persists with an Australian batsman in the middle order like Steve. And he was, of course, in his heyday before he got a bit older, a very useful medium fast bowler. He could be quite sharp and helped Australia to the 87 World Cup triumph in India with his bowling at the death. But yeah, there it is, a record of 16 consecutive games for Australia without defeat at one point of his career. So he is without doubt one of our most famous cricketers.
And we're not going to reveal our captain for obvious reasons until the end, till we've run down all 11. But you could make a really good argument, Jonathan, for this man, couldn't you?
Oh, I'd like to have played under Steve Waugh, I think. I'd love to be in the same side. I mean, there are obviously quite a few possible captains there, but you just felt that Steve Waugh really analysed everybody to within an inch of their lives, their opponents. Yeah, I go back to that look again, that really steely stare. And I just think, if you walk over that boundary rope just behind Steve Waugh in front of you, I think you'd be up for anything.
Well, we've had our middle order. We need an all-rounder. You could choose between Wilfred Rhodes, Keith Miller, Tony Greig, Andrew Flintoff, or this man.
Botham swings again, hits that, and I think it's in the air. Lilly's underneath it. It's 6 runs. It's 6 runs. That's his 100. Lilly was near it. He jumped for it. He couldn't get to it. And Botham has swept Bright for 6.
Up comes Botham now. He bowls to Alderman. And Botham! And England have won!
Botham swings it, and it's 4 runs, it's 4 more, and he's 100.
Very deserved applause for the end of a marvellous undefeated 149 by Botham. One of the great innings of Test cricket of all time. It's the sort of innings which any great player would have been proud to play. It was a stupendous innings.
Botham runs away again, that hair flopping behind him. Past umpire Johnson, bowls to Matthews, and he's caught at second slip.
Lilly bowls against a short one. Botham hooks, and Whitney goes round. It's 6 more. It's 6 more at long leg. Another magnificent stroke.
Botham bowls again to Hughes. Hughes bowled it right through.
Everyone all round the ground cheering, waving flags, recognising that a national hero is doing his stuff again. And what a phenomenal cricketer this man Botham is.
Well, so another night in the side. Sir Ian Botham took, he scored 1,673 runs at 29, 148 wickets at 28. He won the Ashes 5 times. I mean, there is absolutely no way, Jonathan, that we could leave him out.
No.
Because even for 1981 on its own.
Yeah, with bat and ball, let's not forget. I mean, in some ways, you look at the figures and his bowling actually was more effective than his batting. And when he got on a roll, he just had that. I mean, the thing about Ian was it was all about self-belief. And I played a few games with Ian. And what struck me was how he sort of dominated everything. Obviously dominated events on the field. He's one of those all-rounders. Well, they say like Ben Stokes, who's sort of in everything. There are 3 cricketers in one because they're brilliant close catchers as well as Ian was. But he also dominated the dressing room. He's dominated everything. He dominated the team dinner before the match when he's going to get 10 for naught and bowl everybody out. And there's no point in anyone else turning up. He was just totally and utterly committed and to his own ability. And that was, and he lived life pretty hard too, let's be honest, and was still able to get out there and perform as he did. In the sort of late 70s, when he first started, he bowled at a really good pace, but he really swung the ball. And what struck me, I played against West Indies in 1984 with him. It's the first time I played in the same game as Ian. I remember fielding at mid-on on a quick pitch, and he got Jeff Dujon out. It was his 300th Test wicket. And it was one of the quickest balls I've seen because he's such a massively strong man and he could bowl this ball. Anyway, he could do everything. He could do everything. And his back got sore towards the end of his career. He's never quite got that pivot and the swing that he had to start with. But he was out swingers, in swingers, bouncers at a great pace, very hostile, fantastic cricketer.
What are your memories, Jim, of watching Ian Botham? Can you remember when he burst onto the scene for the first time? What you thought of him then?
Yes, I thought he was a phenomenal talent in that 77 series. And he expressed himself more consistently with the ball, I suppose, than the bat. Certainly, if you look at the numbers, I think he only averaged 29 in Test cricket. But when he came off, he did with a thump. And he could change the course of a game with the bat, the ball or with his brilliant catching. So he's one of the giant characters of that era in the history of Ashes cricket. And there it is, 148 wickets at 27. As I say, I think more of a bowling all-rounder than a batting all-rounder, but who can forget what he did at Headingley to change the course of the match and the series after he'd been replaced as captain by Brealey.
Well, that's right. And I was going to say, Jonathan, you know, if we're talking about great captains, you definitely wouldn't put Ian Botham in there, would you? Because that story of 1981, he would argue, of course, what do you say? He had self-belief that he could do everything.
But unfortunately, he ran up against the West Indies, and you know that tour was a disaster in the Caribbean, and so you know he didn't have much of a chance, to be honest, as captain. But then you know he was best as a number 2 anyway. You know, why saddle someone as free as Ian Botham with the captaincy? You know, he was the man standing at slip, the vice captain, or that very senior pro who's got great ideas, great flair, but you wouldn't want to really saddle Ian Botham with actual captaincy, all the responsibility that goes with it.
So how well did Mike Brealey manage him, do you think, in that 1981 series?
Well, I think brilliantly. You imagine, you know, when Ian walked off at Lord's to silence the members when he got that naught. And you know, he lost the captaincy. It took, I reckon, even with Botham's confidence and character, still I suspect a pretty special sort of character to get him back to the top of his game so quickly again. And that's what Mike Brealey did, of course, so brilliantly. I mean, he understands people. You know, he's a psychotherapist himself, or a psychoanalyst, or whatever. You know, so he really gets into people's minds, and no doubt at all. You know, although I do suspect that Ian was mighty relieved, actually, although he wouldn't admit it at the time. Actually, just again to get rid of that captaincy. Just go out and play. Let's go out and play, and that's what these wonderful free spirits should be encouraged to do.
Well, let's move on now to the man behind the stumps. People could choose for their wicketkeeper either Sir Alex Stewart, Rodney Marsh, Alan Knott, Ian Healy, Brad Haddin, but 74% of teams had this man, Adam Gilchrist, with the gloves.
Last ball of the over, Caddick bowls at short, and he plays an uppercut. What an amazing shot. Incredible innovation there from Adam Gilchrist to bring up his 100. 100 on debut. He becomes the 21st Australian to do that. It's all over. Gilchrist pumps the air in delight, and Australia have won the game.
Gilchrist diving in front of Martin Love has claimed a magnificent catch.
And what a way to bring up 150. It's Gilchrist's highest score in Test cricket. It's been the most phenomenal entertainment, and yet thoroughly bruising at the same time. He has battered England's attack here.
He's out. Hussain out. Caught Gilchrist. Bowled Warne. 47.
57 balls. Gilchrist reaches his 100, the fastest Test 100 by any Australian batsman, the second fastest in the history of Test cricket.
We know Adam Gilchrist can explode. He's done it numerous times before, arguably the greatest batsman keeper that's ever played.
So 1,083 runs at 45, 96 dismissals, 3 series wins out of 4. Jim, arguably the greatest wicketkeeper batsman who's ever played. Is that right?
I don't think there's any doubt about that. Although, you know, we're leaving Alan Knott out of this, and he was a pretty fair player, a beautiful wicketkeeper, and he could bat. But Adam was just in another world. If there was ever a game changer at number 7 on the batting list, it was Adam Gilchrist. He could, in an hour, just change the direction of the game. His hands moved like Muhammad Ali. He was so fast. And the picking up the length of the ball, that was mentioned by Agus before about Bradman. Well, Adam had that ability to get onto a ball that was just slightly short-pitched. To most batsmen, he'd be playing defensively down the pitch, but he'd be trying to thump it over or through mid-wicket. He was a phenomenal talent to watch. And I think for most of us, it brought some of the most joyous days of Test cricket watching Adam Gilchrist bat. And he was no slouch behind the stumps either. He had to wait a while to play for Australia because Ian Healy, who was pretty good, was ahead of him. And it was unfortunate for Healy that he missed out in his 100th Test because Adam came into the side at that point, and from there on he produced some of the most memorable Test batting I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's interesting you mention Ian Healy because he actually has better Ashes stats than Gilchrist. Aggers at 1,269 runs.
Yeah, bold shine.
Average not quite so good, 135 dismissals, and he won 6 out of 6 series.
Yeah, and again, he utterly frustrated England too, Healy. I mean, he really did, scoring vital runs. If I'd been asked to vote just purely for a wicketkeeper, I'd have gone for Alan Knott, purely on glove work. But Gilchrist completely reinvented that position. Everybody wanted an Adam Gilchrist in their team because of the way that he batted, and he was a decent keeper, of course. But it was that batting, and I'm pretty sure I guess that clip you played of me there was him in Perth, where he just utterly destroyed poor old Monty.
100 off 57 balls.
It was just a ridiculous innings, really. And everyone wanted one. Everyone then goes shopping out. Right, well, this is it. You've got to score these number of runs per over. You've got to have a wicketkeeper batsman who bats like Adam Gilchrist. That's the blueprint now for every Test team. And of course, you can't just keep churning out Adam Gilchrists. Thoroughly sporting. Loved the way he played the game. Played it hard. Played it very fair. If you are considering who you'd want to bat and play in that position for you in your Test side of the Ashes, it would have to be Gilchrist.
Well, let's move on to the bowlers now. No player was picked by more teams than this man.
And now, at last, Shane Warne coming on. And I just wonder, Trevor, there must be, I would think, a little bit of pressure on young Warne's shoulders here, because he'll know that his team are expecting him to come on and take some wickets here, or at least turn the ball. And here comes Shane Warne. Off only 2 or 3 paces, he bowls, and Gatting is taken on the pen. He's bowled! Well, Gatting's still standing there. He can't believe it.
Warne licks his fingers, tosses the ball from hand to hand, walks in now to bowl to Malcolm. Malcolm pushes forward, and he's scored a short leg, is he? Yes, he's out! Warne has his hat-trick.
What an amazing career this man's had, and where will it finish? What's left for him really to do, I suppose, is just keep taking wickets and pass the milestones ahead.
Warne at Strauss. Strauss is bowled! Oh, bowled by a beauty! And Warne's amazing. England were going along so well.
That was a lovely bit of wrist spin temptation.
Warne's been all over them. He comes to Hoggard, who drives. He's bowled! He's bowled! He's played it on! Hoggard's out! Another wicket for Shane Warne. Warne bowls. Peterson plays the sweep. He's bowled him! He's bowled him!
In comes Warne from the far end and bowls to Panesar, who swings and is bowled. It's all over. And Australia have regained the Ashes at the earliest possible opportunity.
Here comes Warne bowls, and he's got it. There it is. He's got it. And Strauss came forward to play him. A weight leg was beaten in the air. Warne has taken his 700th wicket.
So a total of 195 Ashes wickets at 23, 7 out of 8 series wins. And he was in 88% of teams selected. So he's the most selected player in our all-time Ashes 11. 7% had Jim Laker, 2% had Richie Benaud, if you're wondering who the other spinners were who even got on the score sheet. But really, Jim, there was only one option.
Well, if Bradman was the batting phenomenon for Australia over quite a long period, Warne is definitely the bowling phenomenon. There has never been a bowler like Warne in Test history. Wrist spin, and he could land it on a tuppence, and he could rip it, as you just heard. Poor old Gat first up in that match, and no one in the commentary box could quite believe that Gatting was bowled. Yes, and it was the Boyle described it as that was a Jaffa. Remember that? I do. And he bowled lots of Jaffas in his career. I mean, bowling people around their legs with the flipper. He bowled Alex Stewart with in Brisbane. I'll never forget that.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Jim. I'm going to interrupt you because we all think about Warne and what he was with that massive leg spinner. When he was starting, he had everything, and that flipper that he had that dismissed Alex Stewart bang on the back foot. It was just one of the most classic pieces of wrist spin that you could ever see. It was absolutely brilliant, and unfortunately, because of his shoulder, he lost that, and he just relied then really on his enormous leg spinners. But when he was young and he was really fit and strong, he had everything. It's fantastic.
What was his greatest Ashes? Sorry, Jim, go on.
And I was just going to say, you know, in Australian sporting history, there are some memorable champions, and of course, one of them is always going to be a horse, and it was called Phar Lap, and the Phar Lap's heart is in a museum in Melbourne. Well, I reckon when Warnie leaves us, they'll put his shoulder in that museum because that was the most phenomenally powerful shoulder in spin bowling history, and that's one of the reasons why he was able to sustain, even though he had injury problems and the rest of it, an incredible record in Test match cricket. There he is, the leading Ashes bowler, 195 wickets at 23, and don't forget Warne's batting. I mean, you won't call him an all-rounder, but the number of valuable runs he scored and the catches he took behind the wicket. Yeah, very good slip catches. So he was a bit of a package, apart from the theatrics and the rest of it that he presented to the batsman when he was taking him on. There's a battle of wits against Warne, and he normally won it.
He was a massive character. I mean, I often described him as a pantomime dame because, I mean, he really was. He was in your face and he was all over the place, absurd appeals. But that was all part of the package. And he was a bit of a naughty boy. You know, I mean, people were rather drawn to the character of Shane Warne with the glint in his eye and the big moppy hair, and you know, didn't necessarily always behave himself. So there was, you know, he was just everything, everything that you want in a big iconic sporting character. Really.
Do you remember one of my favourite memories of the 2005 Ashes series, that final day at the Oval, where he and Kevin Peterson had been doing battle, hadn't they, throughout the summer, and then there came the point where Ricky Ponting took Shane Warne off, and you knew at that point that England had won the Ashes because that was the end of the contest, and the applause, the reception he got from the Oval crowd that day was amazing, I think, because the respect for this extraordinary cricketer was felt throughout the country, I think, even though for everything else you say about him.
We talked, what a little aspect we have missed out on, possibly because of that character issue I was talking about. I think he'd been a great captain. You know, I really think he would have been. He was sort of, you know, Australia's missing captain, really. All great ideas, theories, again, working people out, that larger-than-life character. I think he'd been decent, don't you think, Jim?
The two unanswered questions, the two mysteries that we'll never solve, is Keith Miller, Shane Warne. Great characters, but probably got a file 10 inches thick with the Cricket Australia. If they'd captained Australia in Test cricket, what influence could have they brought to bear? Because they were so inspirational with what they did on the field, and they were both denied as much by maybe their behaviour as officialdom, but probably officialdom in the end.
So we've just got the three fast bowlers left, and first up, it's an Aussie that struck fear into the hearts of English batsmen.
Lilly in from the Kirksall Lane end. And Gooch gets an edge, and he's caught.
Lilly in, bowls to both of them. Oh, and he's out, caught behind. There he is, it was a short one.
Lilly moving into bowl to him. And Luckhurst comes back and flishes. He's caught behind. He's caught behind. Amos goes back and it's hit on the arm, just under the shoulder. He tried to duck under it, and it's hurt him too. He's in a bit of pain, might have hit a nerve. Yes, he is in pain now.
And a public address appeal there for a doctor, for someone to come and see Dennis Amos. Lilly bowls. And there's an appeal, is LBW. Lilly comes up. Bowls to Snow, and Snow is hit on the pad there and is out. LBW, Lilly's fifth wicket of the innings, and my word, what a magnificent effort this has been on his part. Lilly comes racing in again, bowls to him, and he moves across and is caught there, fending it off his hip, caught at the wicket. So he's taken 3 wickets in 4 balls.
As Lilly bowls. And here it is, he's going to catch him. He does, he catches it. Lilly bowled the short one, he went to cut, and Dyson just stood there and took the catch. And this has given Lilly a record 142 wickets against England.
Well, Dennis Lilly ended with 167 Ashes wickets at just 21, winning the Ashes 5 times between 1971 and 1981. Jonathan, you think of Dennis Lilly, from an English point of view, you think of pain.
Well, I was thinking, I reckon in my time there have been 2 perfect fast bowling actions, Michael Holding and Dennis Lilly. And that's where the similarity ended, because Michael, sleek, athletic, you know, we can all remember his run-up and that beautiful action, the pace. Dennis Lilly was aggression and hostility, but again, a wonderful fast bowler's run-up, beautiful, classic sideways on action. And he wasn't only a fast bowler, but of course he later developed into be able to do all sorts of things with that ball. I mean, he really was one of those sort of maestros, really. Again, one of those, I never thought I'd get to meet the man. I've worked with him. I never really got over the sort of interviewing him for the first time because, sort of like Dennis Lillee in the early 70s was like my inspiration, So he's an incredibly forthcoming fellow, again, very down to earth, very simple, straightforward sort of fellow. But what a bowler. And all that aggression and hostility and that bristling moustache, all of that, he always looked a bit strange. I thought later on with that headband on, that didn't really do it for me. But that long hair, he just looked like a bit of a wild thing. But all the time with this beautiful, beautiful action.
And that white shirt flopping as well.
Chain
Jim,
around his neck.
You can just picture him. I can just see him running up to bowl now. Jim, what are your thoughts of Dennis Lillee and what he did for Australian cricket?
He was the showman fast bowler. He was superseded by Warne in that regard when he came on the scene. But Lillee with the aluminium bat in Perth, remember that nonsense?
Yes.
And that caused a stir. He was always apt to stir up the game in some way or another. And his partnership with Jeff Thomson in 74-5, that was the most lethal, intimidatory, phenomenal fast bowling we've seen in an Ashes series as a pair. And they were frightening in pre-helmet days. And Lillee was a match winner throughout. I mean, almost half of his test wickets came in Ashes cricket. 355 test wickets, 167 in Ashes cricket. So, and at an average of 21, thank you very much. So I think, as Aggers said, to watch Lillee, at the MCG in particular, when they roared in behind him as he got towards the end of his career. It was a thrilling sight. One of the best to watch in Test cricket in that era.
Very inspirational, wasn't he? I mean, as a youngster watching that, you wanted to be like that. And what's quite interesting is that obviously Dennis Lillee has spawned a lot of young fast bowlers in a way that, funnily enough, Shane Warne hasn't done with wrist spinners. I remember saying back in '93, here we go, the floodgate's going to open now. Everyone's going to want to be Shane Warne and bowl wrist spin. It's fantastic. What a time we can look forward to in 15 years' time, say. Didn't happen, but Dennis Lillee did inspire a lot of really kids watching there. You wanted to bowl like Dennis Lillee.
Yeah, and what about Mitchell Johnson? Because of course the famous moustache from 4 years ago, he channeled Dennis Lillee a bit there, didn't he, Jim?
Yes, that was a part of moustache. That became a part of Mitchell Johnson 4 years ago when he started growing it because of November and the good cause that's been about for some years. And then it was he decided that you might as well keep it, and he followed Lillee in that respect. So I
think Lillee helped him a lot, didn't he, Jim? Didn't at the start of that series where Johnson's confidence was a bit low? I think it was Dennis Lillee over there in Perth who sorted him out.
Yes, he sorted out his action, and for the only time consistently in Mitchell Johnson's career we saw him bowling with a rhythm that was explosive, and in those 5 Test matches. So Lillee, as he has in many other cases, contributed to Mitchell Johnson's success.
Well, Dennis Lillee is in. The next fast bowler, yet another tormentor of English batsmen.
McGrath roaring towards him, and he's out, caught at slip, and the Australians have won the series by 3 matches to 1. They've taken 5 series in a row against England now. They've won the Ashes.
Here's McGrath with a very straight approach and high action. Bowls to Atherton. It is caught behind.
Here's McGrath again, round the wicket, and bowls to Thorpe, who's bowled behind his legs, and Thorpe looks aghast.
Here goes McGrath again, and Atherton comes across outside the off stump and hits it in the air, and he's caught down the leg side.
In comes McGrath, bowls again. Full length, he plays on. And Glenn McGrath has taken his 7th wicket.
Up goes McGrath.
And Scothic's played it on. In goes McGrath round the wicket. And the first ball's going to be very close to this leg before. Peterson's out first ball. He knew it. He walked.
And it's McGrath. He bowls now, and he's hitting the edge. He's caught at 3rd slip. There's 500. First ball after tea. McGrath celebrates. That is a wonderful milestone for one of the great bowlers in the game.
So Glenn McGrath took 157 Ashes wickets. At 21, he won the Ashes 6 times out of 7 before he retired in 2007. Where do you rank him, Jonathan, in the fast bowlers that you've seen?
Again, one of the fastest. I mean, not necessarily fast. An honest, brisk, fast medium. Tall, so he always got bounce, but like a metronome. And that was the great strength of Glenn McGrath. Every ball, there or thereabouts, tormenting poor old Mike Atherton, for instance, opening the batting against McGrath. Every ball challenging you to do play, do leave, just that little bit of movement away and that bit of bounce. And you've got him and Shane Warne at numbers 1 and 2 in Ashes wicket taking. You didn't, as a captain, you didn't really need anybody else. What a combination to have in your team. And funny enough, I remember watching Glenn the first time we saw him. He'd just made his debut, I think, against New Zealand, Jim, and he played against us in the first test of the series up at Brisbane. And I had to realise I wasn't terribly impressed with him. He looked a bit gawky, and I thought, okay, this perhaps a little bit overrated. But my word, he soon put me straight. And again, beautiful action, very sideways on, classical stuff. But McGrath is you wouldn't think about McGrath as pace. You think about McGrath as metronomic accuracy.
Has anyone challenged the outside edge or the off stump more than
Absolutely.
that man? Yeah. And it was really extraordinary the way he was able to consistently do that. As you say, Jonathan, he wasn't a necessarily rapid bowler in the way of a Tyson or a Mitch Johnson, a Wesley Hall, but he was just so relentless. And the combination with Warne, particularly in Ashes matches, absolutely strangled England's batting and many other teams as well, mind you. That was one of the greatest combinations of fast and slow bowling in the history of the game, surely. It just destroyed the confidence of the opposition, as it did famously in Adelaide in that game. England should never have lost after making over 500.
Well, he wound us up again, didn't he? Well, one of the nice things about Glenn, again, we're working with Glenn, aren't we, this series? It'll be great. I remember someone sending me an email or a message or something when Glenn worked with us the last time here in England. He said, I'm absolutely devastated, this correspondent wrote, to discover that Glenn McGrath is actually a nice bloke. I thought it was a great... But he's a lovely man, the gentlest fellow. But one of those, again, that you go over that boundary rope and it sort of turns into sort of a wild thing.
You talk about hunting in pairs, bowlers as well, and you mentioned the kind of McGrath-Warne combination. What about, so we've got Lilly and McGrath. How would they compare to Lilly and Thompson, do you think?
Who's going to go first there?
I don't think anyone was as devastating, on Australian pitches in 74-5 as Tomo. Because I think, as he said himself a few times, he didn't know where they were going. Yeah. What chance did the batsman have?
Sheer pace. Again, that was a great combination, wasn't it? Because you had Lilly's control, albeit with that massive hostility and the showman, but a great bowler. And then Tomo coming in with something that no one had ever seen before, slinging the ball down like that, or scraping his knuckles on the ground as he launched into that sort of what did I say? That sort of catapult.
Javelin throw.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a remarkable pair.
Would you like to have seen Lilly and McGrath together, Jim?
Oh, I'd like to send Bradman and Tendulkar. I mean, we could go on about combinations. I would like to send Bill O'Reilly and Shane Warne bowling together. That would have been something. But yes, I suppose so. But these are the things you can dream about over another glass of Sharders, Aggers, during the Ashes tour.
I think Underwood and Warne would have been an interesting combination. There wouldn't have been any runs scored.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, we'll look forward. We'll continue the fantasy cricket theme when we get out there.
We shall.
Well, look, one final place still to sort in our 11, and it's the only player still playing.
And Anderson moves in and he bowls to Ricky Ponting, who's edging, and is he caught? He's out first ball.
Anderson runs in and settles forward. He gets a good ball. He's nipped it. It's on the way. A beautiful delivery. Anderson's 5th wicket.
That is it. The game has been saved. An extraordinary draw, and James Anderson punches the air. Panesar shakes hands with the Australian fielders.
Anderson in. Ponting drives it inside out. He's caught it cover.
Perfect reverse outswinger from James Anderson.
And Anderson bowls, and he draws in. He's caught behind, is he? He is. He drew him into the stroke outside the off stump. He didn't need to play. Wicket number 22 in the series.
It's Anderson from the river end. He bowls. Warner plays. He ages and he's caught.
Anderson takes his 5th wicket, his 10th of the match. Can there ever have been a more dramatic finish?
With Anderson looking to finish off the innings. In he goes, bowls to line. He's bowled him inside edge. It's all over. Australia bowled out for 136. Jimmy Anderson has wrecked this Australian first innings. Anderson has 6 for.
Well, so far, Jimmy Anderson has taken 87 wickets at 36. He's won the Ashes 4 times out of 6, although we should, of course, remember that the 2 times that he lost were both 5-0. Jonathan, are you surprised that he was included in our all-time 11?
No, not really. I mean, his average in Australia isn't very good. I mean, it's almost 40, and we're hoping for rather better than that this time, aren't we? But because I was a swing bowler, Jimmy Anderson is the bowler who I think I probably admire most out of those, because I know what I was trying to do with the ball and largely failing, and he can do it. And I always love interviewing Anderson because you can talk about swing bowling and what he has done, how he has worked from this sort of very young lad who had his rather strange action, made his debut against Zimbabwe and took 5 wickets, to what he's become now. Because not only can he swing the ball as he wants, sort of, as I would say at my generation, sort of properly, traditional swing, but he can also do it in complete reverse, which is something that is a relatively new phenomenon. And he's gone away and he's worked at it. And apart from 1 or 2 little giveaways, if you watch, obviously Anderson a lot as we do, 1 or 2 little giveaways in what might come in terms of orthodox swing or reverse swing, what comes out of his wrist is incredibly hard to detect. So you've got the skill of actually being able to do it and be able to swing the ball both ways, but the concealment of it. And that's where, for me, swing bowling is just the ultimate, because it is such a brilliant skill. And there's no one I've seen. But I'm going to throw Bob Massey in, because Bob Massey's match, obviously, at Lord's, where he swung the ball prodigiously, crazily, a one-off, really, was something, again, I'll never forget. And that was traditional swing, and it was just a crazy game. But Jimmy Anderson has done it so consistently, obviously, and we'll see if he can do it with a reader down under.
Do you think he deserves his place in the side, Jim, after all of these years, 135 years, 819 players? Should Jimmy Anderson be in there?
Well, I know I'm talking to an England audience, but this would be the most controversial selection of the lot, because Jimmy Anderson's record outside England is not brilliant. In England, it's exceptional, of course, and he's been a great bowler, no doubt about it. Just the fact that he's still bowling at that age when a lot of fellas would have retired. So his record is superb, but is it better than Bob Willis's in Ashes cricket, who took 128 wickets at 26? Is it better than Ray Lindwall's 114 wickets at 22?
Terry Alderman?
Yeah. Terry Alderman's another one. There are quite a few. Yeah. Frank Tyson, for 5 minutes, was the best bowler in the world in the 54-5 series. But can you measure someone just on one series? And there's no doubt about Anderson's durability and his magnificence as a swing bowler, particularly with the Duke's ball in England. He's ripped through Australia a number of times, and he's taken very good wickets in Australia too. So I would have thought of all the selections, it's probably the most controversial.
Well, it's quite interesting how the votes break down, Jim. I'll tell you that in a second. I had a tweet from Chris Davis who says, "Where's Harold Larwood?" And I have to say that Larwood was on my list when I made my selection as well. So we had
one series, you see. One
series. Well, and that's the thing, isn't it? Do you say, well, it was an iconic series, it was important historically, or do you look at the people who've done it consistently over the years and down under and in the UK as well? So McGrath, 83 team managers, if you like, selected McGrath. Lilly, 83% McGrath, 73% Lilly, 39% Anderson, then 22% Willis, 19% Truman, 17% Thompson, 11% Larwood. Alderman 10%, Mitchell Johnson 9%, Barnes 9%.
Where's Jon Snow?
Spofford 5%.
Snow.
Yeah, Tyson 3%. So it's it's this is the fun of this game, isn't it? Really,
Jim's
it's the fun.
right.
It's having
The fact that we are sort of slightly cross fingers about Anderson and the way he's going to perform in this series actually rather underlines that. I mean, it didn't matter where McGrath was bowling or Lilly or these guys,
Yeah.
But we are rather cross fingered and hoping that he can produce something. I've still got, I say, in some ways, if everything goes right from an English perspective, Anderson should step up at Adelaide with that pink ball, and he could be lethal there. And that is almost sort of Anglo-sizing the conditions, if you like, just for our man who can perform so brilliantly in those sort of conditions. So, that's where I'm hoping Anderson's going to stand up.
Yeah, well, Jim, you've got to allow us one Englishman here because the makeup of the team, if you're just joining us now, if you've missed it, you'll be able to download it as a podcast. This is a BBC Sport website survey which has chosen 7 Australians and 4 Englishmen, and the team reads like this: Hobbs, Boycott, Bradman, Border, Steve Waugh, Botham, Gilchrist, Warne, Lilly, McGrath and Anderson. Right, so who is not on that list that you would have decided should have definitely been on the list, Jim?
Definitely on the list. Oh, that's a tough call. I mean, how many players do we want to carry the drinks, I suppose? I mean, it's hard to leave out Bill O'Reilly. If there was no Shane Warne, I would have had O'Reilly in the side automatically. And I mentioned Ray Lindwall. There's Keith Miller as an all-rounder. Arthur Morris as an opening batsman. There are so many other players on the fringe. And this is a conversation we can have in Australia that could go on into the early hours of the day. And we've ignored completely all those chaps who played before our fathers were born, who made their mark in Test cricket, even going back to W.G. Grace, for goodness sake. And Victor Trumper. Victor Trumper, whose name adorns that stand at the SCG. What a great player he was, but you wouldn't think so if you looked at numbers.
No Chappells either. No Chappells.
There's no Greg Chappell or Ian Chappell. So there are lots of players who have missed out. And Ken Barrington, he was one of the best cricketers who ever played in Ashes cricket. He averaged 63, I think. He was a superb player. So the list goes on. Name the second team. That's the next challenge. Get the listeners to pick the second team.
And part of the problem is that because you've got Shane Warne just absolutely cemented in as the spinner, then poor old Jim Laker and co, Derek Underwood and Grimmett and Wilf Rhodes, they just don't get a look in, do they? Similarly with Adam Gilchrist, really. You are just not going to find anybody who really justifiably could stand up against his ability, his talent and his record. So there are key areas that are dominated by massive figures, Ian Botham being, of course, the all-rounder. You couldn't pick somebody ahead of him. But it's those other areas, and these cricketers have all played their part. I mean, Terry Alderman, for me, because he did it home and away too, in bowling like an Englishman, really, but being so effective and tying poor old Graham Gooch up. I don't know, Jeff Thompson. There are so many. Alec Bedser.
Yeah. Who's your captain? Agus, who's your captain?
My captain.
There's only one captain you can have of that team. It's Bradman.
Well, yes, I suppose so. But I'd love to play. But I said earlier, I'd love to have played under Steve Waugh. I just think. I think anyone walked through a barn door for Steve Waugh. But I would like to see what Shane Warne would have been like as a captain. It'd have been entertaining.
The other Englishman who we didn't mention, who would have been an excellent captain of that side and was a phenomenal player, of course, is Len Hutton.
Yes.
Who was on my list,
actually?
actually.
Of that famous win here in 54-5. Yeah. So, I mean, he must have come up for a few votes as an opener.
Trevor Bailey, we've heard him on the radio there a few times, but...
He wouldn't get any support in Australia, dear old Boyle, after his batting at Brisbane.
No.
Yeah, Hutton was 3% behind Boycott, I'm hearing. So if we're looking at the votes, it was pretty close. Yeah. How different, Jim, do you think this would have been if it had been a vote in Australia rather than in the UK. How many Englishmen would have made the list?
None.
Probably both of them might have been the only one, I'd reckon. We wouldn't have had Boycott. Certainly not Jimmy Anderson. No, well, you're dealing with a slightly different flavour there because the Aussies sort of have a slightly blinkered view of history and based on some facts too, which is just vindicated in some way when you think that Australia's won 140 tests and England 108 over the history of the Ashes campaign. So, and I think the Aussies would be going for a few more in that team.
I think so.
And here we are, a week to go. What do you think you're going to be saying, Aggers, when you kick off commentary this time next week plus 3 hours?
I'll be saying I hope that everyone who is listening here tonight and is going to the Gabba will take a bag with only one zip on it. Otherwise, it'll be confiscated. Very important little bit of inside information, that, and it causes all sorts of rows. So that aside, I'm just going to hope that England just make a good start. You know, it's just that tension of that first hour's play, the first Test match of the Ashes series in a very hostile environment, place where it's going to be very noisy, and a place where everybody knows Australia performed very well. So I look at that, the likely batting lineup: Cook, Stoneman, Vince, Root, Malan, Bairstow, and I've got my fingers firmly crossed because that is not a strong lineup, and that is where England look very vulnerable to me. So a lot depends on Cook, a lot depends on Root. And then lower down the order, Moeen. I'm glad Woakes has got wickets. I think he's going to be a very important member. I worry about Stuart Broad. Can he get it back? Can he get his outswinger back? He looked low on pace last summer. He's not bowled very well on the tour so far. Critical from England's perspective that he performs well. So there are question marks, but there are equally question marks about the Australians, and that's what makes us potentially this series really interesting. But if Mitchell Starc fires up in almost exactly a week's time, and gets that ball swinging around at pace, then there are one or two sweaty palms, I think, in the BBC commentary box.
And anything that's giving you sweaty palms, Jim?
Yes, I mean, just remember this: 4 years ago, just after midway through the second session on the first day, Australia was 6 for 132. And everyone was thinking, this is going to be a phenomenal series. Broad had put the wind up Michael Clarke, as I recall. Yeah. And the whole day turned on Brad Haddin's batting with Mitchell Johnson, which gave Australia something to bowl at. And, of course, Mitchell Johnson then came into his own and so on. So, let's just see how things pan out. I have huge expectation for a competitive series because there are some holes in Australia's batting. And, they could fall over any time against a well-organised attack. And they're going to be relying on Starc, Cummins, keep an eye on him, and Hazlewood with Nathan Lyon to keep them in the game all the time, I reckon. And that could be the key to the series. But, look, I just want it to be a magnificent summer of entertaining cricket, and I hope in a way, from the point of view of the series, that Ben Stokes could find his way to play in the series. I know that's another matter, but he would add so much lustre to the competition.